bless our study tonight, Lord, and help us to draw near to you, to have hearts and minds that are open to receive from you all that you have for us, both in this devotional time and also in our discussion afterwards. And we ask for your blessing upon, Lord, just the work that you are doing in and through us. And we ask that you would continue to do that work of building us up and edifying us and strengthening our faith as we seek your face together. We ask these things in Jesus' name. Amen. I want to spend the time that I have in our devotional tonight in Genesis chapter 45 specifically. But of course, before I get there, we kind of have to set the stage, don't we? We kind of have to say what brought us to Genesis chapter 45. There in Joseph's palace as his brothers are before him and he reveals himself to them. What brought us to that point? Well, a lot, right? A lot brought us to that point. Favoritism, going all the way back to their parents and their grandparents. I think that favoritism among children or between wives or whatever the case might be was a problem that plagued this family. Have you ever noticed that certain problems have a tendency to run in the family? How many of y'all have noticed that, either in your own family or in others? There are certain problems that have a tendency to run in the family. Well, one of the problems that ran in this family was the problem of favoritism. Isaac was the favorite over Ishmael. Sarah was the favorite over Hagar. And I'm not saying any of that was wrong. I'm just saying it was, right? And of course, when we have those issues going on, they are often passed on down. Now, when Isaac and Rebekah had children, we had Esau and we had Jacob. And clearly, Isaac had a favorite. It was Esau. And Rebekah had a favorite. It was Jacob. And so that favoritism and the behavior of favoritism was seen all the way back a couple generations in their family. And of course, as Jacob has his children, he had a favorite wife. And his favorite wife was Rachel. And of course, his favorite children were the children that were born to Rachel, Joseph and Benjamin. And Joseph was a good kid. He was a good kid. He was the kind of kid who just didn't know when to stop talking. How many of y'all have known good kids that just didn't know when to stop talking, right? Yeah, and sometimes not knowing when to stop talking got Joseph into a little bit of trouble, particularly with his brothers. It didn't help matters that Dad gave him a special coat that none of the others got. It didn't help matters that he was, Dad's favorite. But then you throw in these dreams where all of their sheaves of wheat are bowing down to his sheaves of wheat, and the sun and the moon and the other stars are bowing down to his star. I don't know how a star bows down. That's weird to me. But anyway, they hear all of this and they're like, dude, kid, who do you think you are, man? We changed your diapers, right? We were around before you were even a twinkle in mom and dad's eye. And yet here you think you're all that. And then, of course, he snitches on his brothers to his dad about their behavior and about what's going on. And, of course, that's where the old saying, snitches get stitches probably originated, right? Because his brothers did not take it lightly. They began to nurse a grudge against him to the extent that one day they see him coming and they're like, that's it, we're going to kill him. We're just going to kill him. Cooler heads prevailed, and instead of killing him, they throw him into a pit. And then later on take him out of the pit and sell him to a bunch of Ishmaelites, their cousins in essence, and they sell him into slavery, and away he goes to Egypt. Of course, the story that Dad hears is, oh, Dad, we just found this coat that you gave him, and it's all torn and bloody. I guess some wild animal must have had him for lunch. And of course, Joseph is distraught, but never doubts that the words that his sons have told him are true. Meanwhile, we know that Joseph is carted off to Egypt, and he is sold to a fellow by the name of Potiphar, the captain of Pharaoh's guards, and that Potiphar promotes Joseph, and he sets Joseph at the head of his house. He makes him his chief steward, if you will, so that everything that Potiphar had was under Joseph's management. The only thing that Joseph was not responsible for was Potiphar's wife. And of course, we know that God blessed Potiphar because of Joseph. And here Joseph has been ridiculed and betrayed by his brothers and sold into slavery and made a servant in a distant land. But not once do we hear Joseph complain, do we? Now, did he complain? Maybe he did, maybe he didn't. We don't know. We are not told. The Bible, however, does say something about him that it doesn't usually say about people, and it says that he was a good-looking young man, right? Joseph was attractive, and that fact was not lost on Potiphar's wife. She wanted him. She wanted him to lay with her in a carnal way. She wanted to have an affair with him. But Joseph had too much integrity for that. He refused. He didn't out her. He didn't tell on her. He might not have been believed if he had, but he avoided her to the best of his ability until one day he's in the house where she is and no one else is there, and what happens? She tries to seduce him. He runs away from her, even leaving his garment in her hands, just slips out of his coat to get away from her. And she's got his jacket there. Well, she uses that jacket, that coat that he had, as evidence with which to falsely accuse him, and Potiphar has him thrown into prison. So now we've got Joseph, ridiculed and hated by his brothers, sold into slavery, forced into labor in the house of an Egyptian, and now falsely accused of sexual assault and thrown into jail. You would think that it would be time to complain. You would think that it would be time to have a bad attitude. You'd think it would be time to begin to question God about what the plan is here. Why is this happening to me? This is not fair. How many of y'all have ever uttered the words, "This is not fair"? Right? Not fair, Lord, not fair. I got news for you. The fair comes around once a year. You can buy tickets and ride the Ferris wheel if you want to. That's about all the fair we're talking about here, because in the life of Joseph, it was not fair. It wasn't fair at all. But even in prison, God showed Joseph favor. He showed him favor. And eventually he's put in charge of the prison. And eventually he meets a couple of other inmates, the chief butler and the chief baker, and they have these dreams, and he interprets the dreams for them. And he tells the baker, "You're going to lose your head over this." But the butler, he says, "You're going to be restored to your position." And of course, exactly what he said is what happens. But he asks the butler, "Hey, don't forget about me. When you get promoted back to your position, remember that I did you this solid, and speak to Pharaoh on my behalf, because I'm not even from here. I'm a Hebrew. I shouldn't even be here. I was falsely accused. Please speak up for me." "Oh, yeah, sure, buddy, no problem. I really appreciate everything you did." And as soon as he gets his job back, what does he do? He forgets all about it. He completely forgets all about it. Now, sometimes we forget things, and it's entirely our fault that we forgot them. Other times we forget things, and I'm pretty sure that God did it, that God allowed us to forget it in order to arrange for something to happen at a particular time and in a particular way. Now, the next time you forget to pay a bill, or the next time you forget an anniversary, I don't want you saying, "Well, Pastor Ken said God might have made me forget it. Maybe that's why I forgot that it's our anniversary." No, you don't get to do that. You still got to take responsibility. But sometimes we do forget things, and even when we forget things, and even when we make mistakes, God still has this ability to just work everything together so perfectly, doesn't he? Because one day Pharaoh has some seriously bad dreams, and he wants to know what they mean, but nobody can tell him. And then the butler's like, "Oh man, I blew it, but hey Pharaoh, there's this guy named Joseph in the prison, and he can tell you the meaning of that dream. I guarantee it, because I've seen him do it before." So Pharaoh sends for Joseph. Joseph interprets the dream. And what is the meaning of the dream? As we read, 7 years of plenty, followed by 7 years of famine, such as the world had never seen. And Pharaoh's like, "Ooh, what are we going to do?" And Joseph says, "Well, here's what you do. You find somebody who's really wise and smart, right? And you put him in charge of it, and they collect the food and save it so that in the years when there's no food, then you've got food." Brilliant idea. Save some for a rainy day. Pharaoh's like, "Well, you sound like you know what you're doing, so the job is yours." And he becomes second in command of all Egypt, second only unto Pharaoh. And I'm telling this story, and you've literally just read it. So why I'm telling you, I'm not entirely sure, but maybe somebody watching the video hasn't read it yet. So Joseph is put in charge, and he does exactly what he recommended they do. He saves food and builds storehouses, and by the time the 7 years of plenty are over, Egypt is prepared. The rest of the world is not, but Egypt is ready. And there was corn and there was grain in Egypt so that people could be fed so that they wouldn't starve. Well, the famine reaches all the way to the land of Canaan, and they hear that there's food in Egypt. And so Jacob sends his other kids, excepting Benjamin, the 10 older boys, he sends them to Egypt to buy grain. And of course, there's the whole exchange there of them buying grain and Joseph inquiring about, their father and whether they have any other brothers. And he finds out about Benjamin. He already knew, of course, but he finds out. And then they go back and the gold is in their sacks and all of this unfolds, right? And eventually they come back because, the famine's going to last for 7 years. It's going to take more than one trip to provide for their needs. And they come back, and finally here in chapter 45, Joseph pulls back the veil, and he's like, hey, it's me, your long-lost brother Joe, right? And of course, they do exactly what most of us would do in their situation. They freak out because here's their sin that has come back to visit them. Have you ever noticed it has a tendency to do that? Eventually the chickens come home to roost, don't they? Eventually there's an accounting that has to be given. Only now the dreams that Joseph had about them bowing down and all that, they've come true. And he is second in command of all of Egypt, and he has the power to have them thrown into prison and to make them his slaves if that's what he wants to do. They are completely and totally at his mercy. A lot of people would look at a situation like that and say, ooh, here's my opportunity to balance the scales, right? Now, I will say he definitely messes with them for a while. And I got to wonder if that wasn't a little of that brotherly, I got you this time, buddy. But he had to know the condition of their hearts, right? He had to know if they had changed, if they had repented. And when he sees Judah willing to take Benjamin's place so that Benjamin can be released and go home, that's what did it for him. He's like, oh, okay, yeah, they've changed. Now they are frightened. Verse 1 of chapter 45 says, Then Joseph could not restrain himself before all those who stood by him, and he cried out, Make everyone go out from me. So no one stood with him while Joseph made himself known to his brothers. And he wept aloud, and the Egyptians and the house of Pharaoh heard it. And then Joseph said to his brothers, I am Joseph. Does my father still live? But his brothers could not answer him, for they were dismayed in his presence. In other words, they were scared speechless. And Joseph said to his brothers, and this is the whole point that I wanted to get to tonight, please, come near to me. So they came near. And then he said, I am Joseph, your brother, whom you sold into Egypt. In other words, yes, I know what you did, and I remember. But now, do not therefore be grieved or angry with yourselves because you sold me here. For God sent me before you to preserve life. For these 2 years the famine has been in the land, and there are still 5 years in which there will be neither plowing nor harvesting. And God sent me before you to preserve a posterity for you in the earth and to save your lives by a great deliverance. So now it was not you who sent me here, but God. And he has made me a father to Pharaoh and Lord of all his house and a ruler throughout all the land of Egypt. You see, the example that we have to follow throughout this whole story is the example of Joseph, and it is an example of the right perspective. Because here's the deal. Sometimes bad things happen. Sometimes bad things happen that are not your fault. Bad things happen that are not your fault and that straight up are not fair. And it would be really easy for us to get angry at other people, at ourselves, at God, because that's just not fair. But you see, God knows the end from the beginning. And God has a purpose even in our suffering. And sometimes the bad things that happen, even the bad things that other people do to us, God has a purpose for it. And his purpose and his plan are perfect. And it comes down to having the same perspective that Joseph had, and that is this. it's not about me, right? It's not about you. But I suffered. Yeah, you did. But maybe you suffered so that others could be spared suffering. Maybe you had to go through some things so that God could prepare you to minister to other people. You say, well, why did I have to suffer with anxiety and depression? So that you could find peace, hope, and strength in God. And when you encountered other people who suffered the same thing, you can share with them the hope that you yourself have found. Why do I have to be sick and struggle with this illness? So that you can find strength in God. And when you encounter other people who are suffering from those same illnesses, you can encourage them and strengthen them by the testimony of how God has sustained you. Maybe. Or maybe it's for some other reason that I'm not aware of and that you never understand. What it comes down to, guys, is trusting God and knowing beyond a doubt that God is good. And if God is good, then I can trust him in my circumstances. If my family hates me and turns away from me, if I'm sold into slavery and sent to a foreign land, if I am falsely accused of things that I did not do, guess what? Sometimes you're going to be the villain of somebody else's story, even though you're the hero of your own, right? And sometimes you're going to be falsely accused and people are going to think evil of you. And I'm preaching to myself right now because there are at least a couple of people that I know of who are not happy with me about a variety of things that honestly I look at it and say it's not my fault. I didn't do anything to them, but they perceive that I have, and I've been falsely accused, and you have too in various times in your life. But we have to be willing to forgive them. We have to be willing to release them and not seek vengeance, to not repay evil for evil, but to overcome evil with good, right? And what is it that allows us to do that? It's the knowledge that what Joseph said here is true and was echoed by Paul in the book of Romans, chapter 8, verse 28, that I will end with tonight. God works all things together for good to those who love God and are called according to his purpose. Joseph knew it to be true and ordered his attitude accordingly. Let's follow that example. Amen? Amen. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, we thank you, Lord, for the example of Joseph. We thank you that you work all things together for good to those who loved you and are called according to your purpose. Lord, help us to love you that much. Help us to trust you that much, that no matter how bad things get, no matter how unfair things may seem, that instead of complaining, we will simply entrust ourselves to you and know that you have a plan, that you won't abandon us, that you will see us through, and that you will work all things together for good to those who love you and are called according to your purpose. Let that describe us tonight. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. God bless you. Or did you turn it off? Great. I want to say one more thing. To those of you who are watching this video later, first of all, thank you for sticking around to the end and actually watching the video. And I want to encourage you that as we read through these passages, take the time to ask yourself those important questions. Is there a truth here about God's word to believe, or about God's character or nature to believe? Is there a promise to receive? Is there a command to obey? Is there an example to follow like there was tonight in the life of Joseph? Or, how can I apply this? Most importantly, I guess, how can I apply this truth to my life today? Ask yourself those questions. If you can find somebody to talk with about them and have a conversation, I'd encourage you to do so, because honestly, what we're getting ready to go back here and do right now is the most fun part of our entire evening, is having a chance to talk together about what God is speaking to us. So I invite you and encourage you to do that on your own. God bless you.